Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the conversation series on mediation, created with an aim and vision to promote mediation in the world around us and to talk about mediation from the perspective of a common person. We will be unmasking and venturing into the life and persona of a mediator in this season 2, and we continue with a short legal disclaimer. The views expressed herein are the voluntary personal perspectives of the speaker and may or may not represent the views of the larger professional community they belong to. This conversation series aims to provide a general overview of the subject matter involved and may not be construed as a professional or legal advice in any manner whatsoever. This session is being recorded for wide circulation. Let me introduce the guest speaker for today's session, Major Chris Breedon, lead facilitator and mediator, a workplace conflict mediator with both the UK military and the Prospero Professional Solutions. He has, to his credit, 10 years' experience as a mediator and also delivers mediation training, conflict management training, and conflict coaching. Having mediated in the UK, the Falkland Islands, and Afghanistan to a broad community covering different cultures, and very righteously points out that the tenets of mediation are the same regardless. So, welcome on board, Major Chris. It's a pleasure to have you here with us, and it's a very interesting topic. Mediation in the armed forces. So, armed forces which works on discipline, which works on orders and their implementation. So, what is the role of conflict there? Is there a role of conflict as such so that there could be a role of mediation? What's your point from the perspective of a common person there, Major?
Yeah, so I predominantly mediate in the Royal Air Force. So um, the conflicts that break out between two people in the RAF are exactly the same as they are for people in other organisations, whether they're in the military or outside. So potentially where two people aren't getting on particularly well on a personal level, or if a manager um, is not getting on particularly well with subordinate, etc. That's where the standard conflicts arise, and the causes of those conflicts are exactly the same in the military as they are outside.
And while you were saying that, it just when you said that the senior and the junior, uh, in my opinion, when a senior officer or the commanding officer, I should say, is aware of the nuances of mediation and the trained or has received some training in mediation, what it means. Do you think command will become a little more easier? What's your views on that?
Um, yeah, uniquely in the military, we have to worry about two things. One is making sure that orders are followed, and so the job of the military is to ultimately is to warfight, and when orders are given, they must be obeyed if they're legal. So we're not talking about disagreeing with an order, and therefore you go to a mediation. If you're given an order, you're given an order, and you're expected to carry it out. Um, how those orders are given and how people are treated outside of proper military business is where conflict arises. And I think yes, if managers are given training in maybe not mediation, but training in how conflict occurs, what presses people's triggers, what gets people emotionally charged. If they understand that, so more conflict management and conflict coaching is a better training method for leaders in the military than necessarily training them as mediators. But the more they know about how conflict arises, the better they are able to lead.
Yes, that's really a great statement. But when we talk about mediation, there's a procedure and there's sensitization of it. Now, in military, do the troops or the officers really adapt to mediation? How's it doing there in RAF?
So the mediators are drawn from the whole body of the rank structure. So we have mediators that are drawn from the junior ranks and mediators that are drawn from senior officers. So we cover the whole spread in the rank range, really. And it's taken a long time for people to understand what mediation is and how that process works in the military. But the process is very similar to other organizations I've mediated in as part of my business with Prospero Professional Solutions. So the processes are generally the same. And that process for us is if someone feels that they are being treated badly or they are being bullied or harassed or discriminated against, then they can go and speak to a specialist advisor. And in solving that issue, they have a number of avenues available to them. First of all, we encourage people to solve their conflict problems at the lowest possible level. So ideally, we try and get people to talk to each other before the situation gets any worse. Or they could write a letter explaining what they found has made them unhappy. Or we can go to mediation. And people have the choice. They can actually use all of those things in a step, and they can ask for mediation. And what would normally happen is that specialist advisor would advise that mediation is an option. And if both parties agree to the mediation, then in the RAF, certainly, we go out on a team site for mediators and ask if we can have a volunteer mediator to do the mediation for the people. And that is where we work out, make sure that we don't know the people so we can remain neutral. We're not given any information about what the conflict is actually about, so we can maintain our confidentiality as well. And once we've agreed, or they found a mediator that can do it, the mediator is appointed, and then he travels to the location where the personnel are based. Sometimes for me, that is as far away as the Falkland Islands, so a 19-hour aircraft flight. Or occasionally, if people are now separated by two countries, we can do it on Zoom or Teams. And I did one recently with somebody in Cyprus and somebody in Germany, and I was based in the UK, helping mediate with that over Teams. So we do the mediation, exactly the same mediation as anybody else would recognise, hoping to come to an agreement, and that agreement can either be a written agreement or not. And then the parties decide who gets to see that agreement. And often they just keep it to themselves, or they might want it pushed into their commanding officer or something like that. Most of the time, people want to keep the agreement to themselves, and we leave it at that. And then all I do as a mediator, once the mediation has been completed, is I tell the HR system that we have completed the mediation. And I don't give them any details as to what was said or what the agreement was, etc. Just like you get anywhere else, really.
I think that really works because in a system where people actually live together, troops are living together, conflict, and that it should not become a gossip. That really makes a huge difference. Now, Major, when we talk about military, we also have a procedure called code of inquiry. Court of inquiry. Uh, when we talk about mediation, vis-a-vis court of inquiry, what do you think is more preferred by people, and are people, I mean, what is the difference for the common person to understand?
Well, obviously, for the military, and much, I suppose, like other organisations, there are a set of rules that you must not infringe. We have military law, and if you break military law, then the chances are there will be an investigation involving potentially the military police. They will investigate that matter. So let's say we're talking about somebody has committed a crime of some sort. That is investigated by the military police, and will end up in a discipline process, which could end up in a court or a court martial, or the military equivalent of a magistrate's court, quite a low-level court, where it's dealt with summarily by a single officer. In those instances, and for those transgressions, mediation is not an option. So mediation is kept away. So we have two processes. We have like the discipline process, where you break the law, as it were, or you behave in an unprofessional manner. And then the other system where the way people are treated, or the way people feel they have been treated, especially if they feel, for instance, they've been bullied for no particular reason, then the mediation process is part of that. But of course, in that I said earlier, we have several steps. So you could talk to the person, you could write the person a letter, you could go to mediation, you could do all three of those things. Or you could then put in your formal letter of complaint. And when you put in your formal letter of complaint, that goes into the system. It's looked at by a legal team to make sure that it's a valid complaint and is in accordance with all our procedures and regulations, etc. And if they deem that it's a valid complaint, then an investigator will be appointed to come and speak to you and your witnesses and to the other party and their witnesses. That investigator will gather all the information and then we'll present it to a deciding officer or deciding board of officers who will decide whether the complaint is upheld or not. Normally, those complaints don't end in discipline. They end in an adjustment of procedures or the transgressor being reminded about how they should behave towards people, especially if we're talking bullying or discrimination, etc. There may be the odd instance where the decision person has decided that actually there has been some military law transgressed here, and then it could slip into a discipline process, but that is quite rare. So the mediation part of that would ordinarily happen before the formal investigation. And what we're trying to do with mediation is stop those investigations happening and have the two parties come to an agreement, where one acknowledges perhaps that their behavior wasn't as it should have been, or the misunderstandings are rectified by use of all our techniques that we have as mediators. And then that stops the investigations and that. And as we all know, the investigations can take a long time. They take up a lot of resource. And because they take a long time, they create a great deal of stress. And what we try to do with mediation before that is to solve all those problems before we go into any formal complaints process. It's a much quicker process. We can get a problem solved within a couple of weeks of somebody raising it. If they, excuse me, if they decide that they want to put in a formal complaint, we're looking sometimes up to a year for that complaint to be resolved, sometimes more. And that has its all its added stresses. So mediation is a much preferred solution. But like everything else, it is in the gift of the person who wants to make the complaint. If they feel they don't want to go to mediation, or that they've been to mediation and are still not really satisfied with the outcome, then they can progress to the formal investigation if they want.
So that also brings us to a very important aspect, that first, the induction and training of like mediators, are they picked up from the forces itself?
Yes, so in the Royal Air Force, certainly all of our mediators are in the Royal Air Force. We don't conduct our own mediation training, so we have a contract with a civilian mediation trainer, and they come in and provide relatively regular courses for volunteers. So currently in the Royal Air Force, we have a strength of about 32,000 people, and we have about 100 mediators. Of that 100 mediators, probably practicing mediators who are doing it regularly, there are probably about 15 of us. And that probably is enough. We are servicing, from what the last set of statistics we had, servicing something in the region of 200 to 300 mediations maybe in a year. And each one of those mediations potentially stops a long protracted investigation. So it works.
Does it require for a mediator, or is it good for a mediator to know the armed forces law, the Army Act?
I don't think it's necessarily a requirement, because when somebody wishes to raise a complaint and goes to the HR system, then the HR system are looking at that complaint initially, making sure that there are no laws that have been broken, because they may well decide that actually mediation is not the appropriate way ahead and it needs to be a discipline process. So for you, the mediator, you don't need to know military law particularly well. And also for officers, certainly, we get grounded in military legal training when we first go through our officer training. I'm not sure that happens for the junior ranks. But in my experience of, I don't know, I must have done about 75 mediations with the military in various guises. I've never had to worry about how much military law I know because we're in a different process and somebody else has taken care of that. All I have to provide as a mediator is a safe space, which is very important when you're dealing with people that are quite different in rank. The junior rank needs to feel that they can be honest in the mediation without there being repercussion outside of the mediation room. And then I have a safeguarding issue. Obviously, if something is said in the mediation that I think warrants bringing to the attention, we'll say for argument's sake that somebody has said that somebody has threatened the other party, or threatened maybe people the other party knows, or has said something that I know breaks military law, then I'm obliged to report that into the system. And I have to say again, I've never come across that. The hardest bit is to provide the safe space so that the junior person feels comfortable in that process. And I think, in my experience again, everybody that turns up to the mediation are willing participants. They want this problem to be solved at mediation. And I've yet to really hear or see any repercussions for people after the mediation in things that they may have said. And that's the biggest challenge, but probably the most important one we have to cross.
When we talk about juniors and seniors coming on the mediation table, you in our previous conversation that we had, you also talked about how they look at each other, what is the power imbalance we are talking about, and how does a mediator like yourself deal? How has your experience been? How do you deal with the power imbalance there? Because a junior officer and a senior officer is there on the mediation table, and you are the mediator. So,
That's the trick.
yeah.
What I try to do first is I introduce myself as a mediator. I normally send them an email, or if I can, try and speak to them both beforehand. I remind them that inside the mediation room there is no rank. We are all using first names. We don't dress in military uniform, and we dress in our civilian clothes. So by using civilian clothes and using first names, we go some way to easing that. But of course, we all know that this person is the senior person, this person is the junior person, and the senior person, of course, might out me significantly as well. So you have to have the moral courage as the mediator to sort of impose yourself in the room. And yes, this might be your mediation, but I am the mediator and I am in charge and I lay the rules. And if you break the rules that I set in trying to make this a safe space, I will hold you to account. And sometimes, I think on maybe one or two occasions, I've had to pause the mediation and go and speak to the transgressor in a breakout room and remind them that this is a mediation. And yes, it is confidential, but we are all at the same rank. We are all trying to solve a problem. And mediation is not the senior person dictating how this will look. It is a collaboration. And if the senior person is not prepared to follow the rules and conduct a mediation rather than, dictate, then I will call the mediation. And then what I will do is, because I then believe that you have not attended the mediation with the right frame of mind or the right intent, then I may well report that into the system and say the mediation was not successful because this person did not want to mediate. They wanted to dictate solutions. I've never had to do that. I have had to have a chat with a couple of people just to remind them that we don't have any rank in the mediation. But of course, what we also have to remember is we still have to be respectful. We still have to understand that one person is a very senior person and the other person is not. That does not mean to say that the junior person is also not due respect. So we treat everybody with respect, and we have to be careful of that. Other things I try to do is if I know I'm mediating two people that are junior to me, I think about how I'm going to dress. Um, if I turn up in I don't know, a tweed suit, for the junior people, it's going to scream officer. And that might put them on their back foot. They know I'm an officer anyway, because I've sent them an email from the military system. Um, but I try to be much more friendly and accommodating and let them know that as far as I am concerned, we are all on the same level. But of course, I want to help them control their biases and to trust me, really. So if I pitch up looking for all the world like a senior officer, then it might not help the mediation in the initial stages until they warm to me and realize they can trust me. But then conversely, if I'm mediating to senior people to me, I know that they expect me to be professional. And so if I was to turn up in ripped jeans and a t-shirt, immediately they might undermine my authority as the mediator. So I do consciously think about how I am going to present myself. And where I have mediated some very, very senior officers, then I still call them both sir. They can call each other by their first name, but I will give them deference to their rank. And I will call them both sir. Plus, after 40 years service, it's really, really difficult to call a three-star general by his first name. So
Yes.
it's much easier. It also, I think for them, it helps them relax a bit more. They're not used to necessarily being addressed by their first name by somebody as low a rank as me. Um, so it is really incumbent. And I think it's probably the same for mediators in civilian organizations. If you were mediating the CEO of the board and you were just an HR worker quite a long way down the chain, you might think about how you're going to address that person and how you're going to look, etc. Should it make a difference? Not really, but we're also all humans. And in the military, we're all in the military, and we've had ingrained in us a discipline and a level of respect. And that should always be there at some point, but it shouldn't dictate how the mediation is conducted itself.
So, being in your skin and yet mediating in your skills is, I think, a very articulate work that a trained mediator would definitely understand, and that you have already the expertise, that I would say. But from the system's point of view, do you envisage any shortcomings, or where you feel that mediation could really improve upon, or you feel that such a thing could make a lot of difference in the system or in the procedure as such? Do you think that?
Um, so we've probably only really embraced mediation um, professionally in the Royal Air Force, certainly in the last decade, really. Um, and initially we let go of it for a few years. I don't think it really caught on and people really understood it, perhaps at a much senior level. But certainly in the last 5 or 6 years, it's really developed. What could we do better? I think what we could do better is we could publicize it a bit more. So when people go through their initial recruit training, be they soldiers or aviators or officers, that we tell them about mediation, and we tell them about mediation in some detail, so that they understand the process. We don't need to turn them into mediators, and we probably don't want to. I think to support that, we could do a lot more conflict management training. And we still probably, the same as most militaries, I should imagine. We still probably think that just because somebody holds a rank, they hold an experience and have all the answers and that they do everything right. They don't. They're human beings like the rest of us.
Yes.
And if they're not trained in how conflict arises and how to spot signs of conflict and how to manage that conflict, then they're just not going to be any good at it. And we don't necessarily, I think, do enough of that. And we could. And once we understand the nature of personal conflict rather than international conflicts, then it can make the military a much more efficient machine, especially when we're not as big as we used to be. So we need to be efficient and understanding your people and what makes them tick and what makes them work and what can press their buttons and how you would deal with it if you had, or if you saw it going on, would make it better. But we've certainly come a very long way. I think mediation has been a success in the Royal Air Force, certainly, in the way that we've embraced it. But most people, I think, and I think this is the same for when I'm doing it with my business, everyone seems to be a bit skeptical when they first arrive at the door. They're convinced that they're taking this properly, but the other person is not interested. So I think from that, the military person is pretty much the same as a civilian when they first walk into that mediation room. But we could do better. We do train our mediators to a good standard. There is compulsory CPD for the mediators through the year. And we look at how we pair our mediators up. Our process is a bit slow, if I'm honest. So, for instance, I'm looking at some that have been advertised. It's, can we have a mediator sometime in the next month to go to a particular station to sort a mediation out for us? And I'm like, well, if you know you need a mediation, that means two people have come to you and have agreed to that mediation. And what we're not very good at doing is now telling those people, you have a conflict that you want us to help you solve with mediation. That should become your number one priority. It shouldn't be your job or your leave or you're going on holiday somewhere. If you have a conflict that you want us to solve, we should be solving it today, tomorrow, or the next day, because we have mediators that can do that. But instead, it seems to still be quite something we'll get round to in the next few weeks when I can fit it in. And what people don't understand is that means their conflict continues and the stress they're under continues and the impact it has on their organization continues. So I think overall, we could be better at the administration of the process to get it done more quickly. But that would require the senior management to understand that this person wants a mediation with this other person that might be from a different organization. And we have to get that done now. I have to get that sorted now. So the job I was going to give them to do, if it's not critically important, we'll put that on hold and we'll get this mediation sorted. Because once it's sorted and that conflict is dealt with, it leaves that person's mind and they can concentrate then more on their military job. But all the while they've got this conflict going on and mediation is still 3-4 weeks away, it's still on their mind and they might not be concentrating enough on their proper job. So yeah, that would be what I would change.
When we talk about military, we also have to understand that we are talking about some special circumstances where people are living away from their family and there is a lot of am I audible?
Yep.
What my student. There is a lot of stress from living apart from families, different circumstances. Does a mediator training take into account all these emotional aspects also when we talk about mediation in the armed forces? Or
no, because I would say the training that we receive is training delivered from a civilian organization. And that doesn't necessarily take into account that we're military mediators mediating in the military. So we get the standard mediation training really. But what we do have is we have a big support system here. So if somebody is going through a conflict that is causing them a degree of stress, and add to that the stress of being away from their families or the stress of potentially being a little bit unwell and all those other things that impact people, be it in the military or not, and we have a really good support system. So normally when somebody's having a problem that we think we might solve by mediation, they are also getting support from our welfare system. So the doctors are on board, and making sure that person is getting the medication or the sick leave or whatever. We've got dozens and dozens of organizations that provide support for people that are considerably stressed or people that are going through some traumatic events, etc. And we all work together as a team. Now, we don't necessarily share confidential information for each other, but I normally ask before the mediation, is there anything else going on in your life that I would need to know about to understand potentially where you're coming from? Because that might help me in the mediation. If I know that the one of the parties is getting welfare support because he has a sick child that he is not seeing very regularly, but is also providing a stressor for him, it might help if that is brought up in the mediation so the other party can understand that whilst you might think what you did or said was innocuous and shouldn't have provoked the response you got, now that you hear that this person has a sick child or that their father is ill in hospital recovering from a heart operation, it might help you understand their perspective and better understand the impact of what you did or said at the time. But do all mediators do that? Probably not. I just do that because I have a degree of experience. But definitely there's a big support system out there for people that are stressed for whatever reason, and mediation falls into that along the process. So as a joined up approach, we're pretty good at that, certainly in the Royal Air Force.
That is really fabulous, because that's exactly what I had thought in my mind. And the session and your views, it really make a huge difference. So I really believe that people all around who would be listening to this would really benefit from that uh, that perspective of yours, and people would now, or militaries around the world would now think of mediation as a first means of dispute resolution or conflict resolution, because conflict is inevitable even where orders need to be adhered to. There could be conflict in different parts or different thought process of two people. We are actually dealing with human emotions wherever we are working, and military, no bar, it's also a workplace. So that was really awesome experience. I hope we wind up with that, and we thank you so much. And any other experience? We have 2 3 minutes to wind up. So anything that you want to share, or any of your experience that you
Uh, I was saying to you about when we were talking about stresses earlier, when you introduced me, you said that I had conducted a mediation in Afghanistan, and that still always sits there is the most surreal mediation in my head when I was mediating between two very senior Afghan officers, um, both of who were armed. They had guns, I had a gun, mine two interpreters, and my sort of bodyguard had a gun, and it got very tense. As most mediations do, you get to that point where it's either going to work or
or
everyone's going to
not?
leave the room. Except this difference was, there was a good chance that if it didn't work, guns were going to get drawn. And yeah, so
So guns
I did.
on the mediation, in the mediation room, and you were talking peace. So how unnerving was that? I mean, it's not possible for me to do that. So
It's
how
yeah, it was. Well, you were always on a sort of high alert personally anyway, because obviously with what was going on in Afghanistan at the time, anything could happen at any second. Um, so that was always in your mind. And we sit there in mediation, and we're talking about, you also look at people's body language, because that's where you get 70% of your communication from. And it was, being a trained guardian angel, we call it myself. You're constantly watching, where that man's hand is. You know, is he going towards his holster? Is his holster done up, or did he have it undone when he came in the room? What is the intent? Um, it didn't help that these two men also hated each other on a personal level. And what we were negotiating was some military requirements that they both owed each other. But the mediation itself was particularly important because a consequence of their conflict was that people were dying out on the battlefield because one man was refusing to support the other. And so it was really important that we got to a resolution and a collaboration between these two men, because the consequence of their conflict was that people were literally dying on the battlefield. But we got there. It got quite tense. Nobody pulled a gun, which was really good. But it was also one of those places where everything was sorted. We got a written agreement. You have two interpreters there to make sure that the actual first interpreter is actually telling you what is being said. And we actually wrote the interpreter had to write the agreement up because it wasn't in English, and we had to make sure that I understood what was in there when we left. But it's the first mediation where I've quite literally backed out of the room. And then my guardian angel sort of backed out of the room with his sort of, rifle slightly raised as we sort of covered ourselves out. So even though it was a really successful mediation, and the proof was within days on the battlefield, things changed considerably. That was still the most surreal mediation I've ever done in my life.
And I can say hats off to you to have pulled it off and saved a lot of in timely saving a lot of people. That was really great. So thank you so much, Major. It's been a pleasure, and thank you so much for this
Yeah,
session.
lovely. Thank you very much for having me on board. Lovely to see you again.